Hello and welcome to the channel Xcode Bill. It's your host Bill Yengo. In the previous tutorial, which I'll leave the link to that somewhere at the top here, we performed or created a post API and we performed CRUD operations on our post entity. All of our data was stored in memory. That meant if we restart our application, we lose complete access to that data. Phew, gone. But in this video tutorial, however, we're going to build on that and we're going to store our data in an actual database. We'll be using TypeORM for that and SQLite. Now, the SQLite can be changed and you can use whatever database you want. You can use PostgreSQL, MySQL, MariaDB, whatever, it doesn't matter. Now, why are we using TypeORM for that? First of all, it offers seamless integration. It gives us access to TypeScript decorators. It is seamless in automating our schema updates. This creates faster development, and also, this is the interesting part, it offers cross-database support, which means Postgres, SQL, MySQL, doesn't matter. So enough chit chat, let's hop in and let's get cracking. So if you look into our repository, we have the TS node post, which is what we created in our last video tutorial. I've gone ahead and copied that. You can clone that from the repository. So we're going to cd into ts post-db, and then we'll do a code dot, which would basically run VS Code for us. So let's bring that into view. We have two terminals here. We're going to do npm run dev, and then here we're going to do an npm install. We're going to install TypeORM SQLite and reflect metadata. This is needed for TypeORM. So we're going to go ahead, once this is installed, come into our config and we'll create an orm config.ts. I like to structure it this way, and then once we are in there, what we're going to do is we are going to import data source and data source options from TypeORM, and we're also going to do a const config of type data source options. This basically gives us access to types. We're going to do an export default of config, and then once we have that, we're going to do an export const app. Let's put that in cap app data source, which is going to be equals to new data source, and we'll pass in the config file, right? So in here, what we want to do is let's copy that in. We're lazy and we don't want to type that in. So we have a type of SQLite, we have database. This is going to create a new database of SQLite, and synchronize is going to set it true. And let's get rid of this error here by coming into our okay, let's create a new folder called not in config. Let's come to source. Let's create a database. And inside here, we are going to create a folder called entities. And we come back in here and we'll create an index.ts, which basically is going to be the file where we export all our entities. So let's go ahead and say export const entities, which is going to be at the moment an empty array. And then in here, we're going to say entities, right? Now, once we have that installed, that should be fine. We're going to load our entities and put them in here. And the next thing we're going to do is let's create a base entity. So the base entity will basically have our ID and created add, updated add, just so it's a basic base entity. So base.ntt.ts. And what we're going to do is we're going to import the things that we need, which is going to be data create column, delete column, entity, primary key column, and we will be expanding or extending our other component. So we'll say entity, and then we'll give it a name of base, and then we will say export class base, sorry about that, entity, and we will say, let's just copy that in because we don't want to, it's not important to copy that all in. Now we have the primary generated column, which is the UUID. We're getting this error message because decorators are currently at an experimental stage. So in order to get rid of these errors, we come into tsconfig.json here, And what we're looking at, we want to do a Control F. We want to search for strict property initialization, and then we have to set that to false. Let's uncomment that. And then we're also looking at experimental decorative values. So we uncomment that, we leave that true. And then also we want to be able to emit decorative metadata. So once we save that, let's close this up. And you notice that all the errors that we had are all gone. So we now come into entities, and now we want to create the entity that we're interested in, which is the post.entity.ts. And once we create that, we want to import our base entity from base entity. We also want to import colon and entity. Let's close this up. Let's get rid of this, and let's say add entity, and then we'll give it a name of type post, right? And then we come to the bottom and we say export class post entity dot now post entity, and then we're going to copy in the columns or the columns that we need. So we have content, title, publish, and all that, and all of that is coming from the base entity, right? The base entity will provide the ID and all that, and then we are going to extend. So I forgot about that. So extend base entity. So we don't have an ID here. We'll get that from the base entity, right? So once we have that, let's come to our index, and we want to populate our entities. So we will say post entity, right? And then we will add that to our list. And then remember that this list is being used in the config in order to tell TypeORM where our configs or entities are found. So let's get rid of this terminal here. We no longer need that. We just need to see our API running here. And then the next thing that we want to do is we will want to create our repository, right? But that's what we're going to use. But before we do that, let's go ahead and create inside database. Let's create a connect. We want to be able to connect to our database, right? So let's say db.connect.ts. And once we're in here, what we're going to do is to import reflect metadata. This is used for TypeORM, and then we'll import config. And inside here, we also want to import the app. Now that's wrong. So we want to import config instead from ORM config, and then we also want to import the app data source. So the way we're going to structure this folder is going to be interesting. There's so many ways to do this, but let's do it this way. So we're going to say app data source is equals to app data source, which is what we import from here. But then we're going to create a function and run that function, and it's going to run an asynchronous function. And then we'll do some defensive coding, which means we'll say if not app data source, which means it has not, the object has not yet been created. We'll say app data source is equals to new data source, and we'll pass in our config. We're basically repeating the initialization process here. That is for some reason that wasn't initialized. So we now do an app data source.initialize, which basically creates a connection to the database. And then we want to say that then if we are successful, we want to run an anonymous function and basically have a console log statement saying that we have connection to a database. But then if there is an error, we do the catch block and we pass in an error object, and then all we do is basically log that error to the console. This will manage that properly. And once we have that, we want to come into our server and we want to connect our database. So all we do is import that file. So we say import database and then db connect. Once we save this, it's going to do some checks and then connect us to our database here. So we're getting these log messages and all that because we did set login to true. And then if you notice, our database SQLite has been created here at the bottom. That is where we told it to be created. Now, we are going to be using a repository pattern to be able to handle our objects or entities and create or basically manage our entities. So let's get rid of index.ts base, let's get rid of host, let's get rid of the config file, and then let's come into our database, and inside here let's just create a file called repositories, right, .ts. And inside here is where we're just going to basically create our repositories. So we want to import app data source from config ORM. We also want to import the post entity. And then what we want to do is we want to say const post repository. Sorry, I cannot type or spell repository. Is equals to app data source dot get repository, and we pass in our post entity. Now we need to export this. We can come to the bottom here and say export, and then we pass in an object and say post repository, but then that will mean that every time we need to add every repository that we create to this object. So I prefer to just say export post constant post repository, and that should basically do it, right? Now remember that we were working with database in memory, and this is what we have here. So what we want to do is we want to do some cleanup. So let's clean up the entire data folder, which means we're getting rid of the post data.ts, and now we'll manage our database using the repository pattern, and this will give us access to actually store our data into the database. Now we're going to get an error, which is fine, and that's because if we come to service, which is a post service, we're still making use of the get post and all that. That's what we want to look to change, right? So let's get rid of this. We will obviously get an error message, and we have get post here. Let's take care of that. So the first thing we want to do is we want to import our post repository, right? And then instead of get post, we want to say await post repository.find, and when you pass in no parameters, it basically searches the entire database to get every single post. Now we're getting these errors. That is completely fine. That's because we still have a lot of errors that we need to fix. So we're done with the get repositories. We are passing in the post, and then we're also counting that post object, the count or the length, right? So we now come into our create post. We're having a create update post DTO. We no longer need the post, this object here, and that because we don't want to make use of the ID. So because our database is going to create the ID for us, our repository partner will create that for us. So we get rid of the ID. Let's get rid of the type here. And then once we have that, remember we are still creating the auto ID like this. In the next video, we'll look at using our own author or user identity or entity, right? So what we're going to do is that we're going to say const created post is equals to post. I don't think this is an asynchronous function. Post repository.create, and then we pass in our new post, which is basically our new post data. Let's add a data here. So this will be new post data, right? This is what we're getting from the user. And then once we have that, we'll say const saved post is equals to await. This is an asynchronous function. It's going to be post repository.save, and then we're going to pass in our created post with a D. Let's update this to a D. Let's just copy this because, well, we like to copy stuff. And then we want to have that return to us whatever thing was saved to the database. So it does a get query. So let's do a reload of true, right? And then we get rid of our get post because we no longer need that. And then our post now becomes the post that was saved. Here, I think we can also fetch the post because we need all the post, right? That is found in the DB. So we say const post is equals to await post repository.find, and that's it. It finds everything, and then this basically updates this value here. Now the next thing we'll do is look at our get single post, right? Now we're going to repeat this particular function here multiple times So let's create a helper function at the bottom of our file, and that will call that. We're not going to export that, right, because it's a private function. So we'll do async function find post by ID, and then it's going to take in a post ID of type string, and then it's going to return a promise of post entity, right? So we have that. We'll say const post found. I cannot spell found for some reason. Is equals to await post repository dot find one, and then we'll pass in a where clause. If you know SQL, then you find this interesting. We'll find this ID is equals to post ID. Once we have that, we want to do a simple check, which is if not post found. Remember that we had a custom error message in the previous video. We will throw a new custom error, and we will backslash post with ID, and we'll do a $, and then we say post ID not found, and then at the bottom we'll say return post found, right? Now let's get back to our get single post. That should be create post get single post, right? So inside here we're getting the ID from the params. So what we're going to do is we'll say const post found is equals to await find post by ID, and I'll pass in the ID. Now you could manage this differently by doing some checks here and throwing some error, but that's fine. As an assignment, you can look at how you can make this better, right? So we have a post ID here, and we no longer need to throw an error because we're throwing that error in here when or if we do not find the post. And then we're just doing a rest of stages of 200, and then we are passing or sending back the post that we found to our user. So the next thing we need to look at is our update post. We have our post data. Let's get rid of this and that. And in here, what we're using is, now let's come here. Let's say const post found, okay, is equals to await find post by ID, and we pass in the ID that we get from our params here, which is request of params. And then once we have that, we update our new post. So we take the values from here, we place them in, we do a spread operation, and then we update it with the data that we get from the user, right? So now we need a couple of things, right? We say const post is equals to await post repository dot save. We now want to save our updated post information, and then at the bottom we say const. We also want to retrieve all the post information, so we say post is equals to await post repository dot find. We do not, so we get the post. I think we're getting an error here because we have post twice. And then we do a res.status of 200, we pass the post, which is going to be the updated post. And then, no, I don't think we need this. We get rid of this. So we pass back the post that we did create and find. And then we do a post. I think that should be fine. So we do a save. I think we need to do a reload of true here because we saved that, and then we want to get that back. So this will be the post that we do save to the DB. Now the next thing we look at is our delete post. We already have our ID from the params. Let's get rid of all of this. So we do an await find post by ID. We don't necessarily need the post back. So we pass it in an ID. It will do the error checking for us and throw an error message if needed. And then we now also can say await post repository.delete. Now we then do a rest the status of 200, and we pass a message just saying, hey, our post was successfully deleted. Okay, so we have done all that, all the errors are fixed. Let's go ahead and look at our database in DBeaver. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that. So DBeaver is a tool for working with your database, managing your database. You can use it to connect to MySQL, PostgreSQL, any database of your choice. So we're going to come here and we're going to, this basically is where you click to connect. We'll take SQLite and we'll take next. We're going to open the folder itself where we have our database. So that should be in, YouTube, and then that's going to be Git repository, and then here, and remember this is the database that we created when we did create our TypeORM config. Now we're going to click on these, and we're going to say select, and that should select that. We can test the DB, and we tell the, oh, it has been connected. We take OK, and then we take finish, right? So that has connected us to our DB here. Now, in order to run a query, we click here, and then we can say select all from post, right? We press enter, and at the moment we do not have any posts in our database. So we're going to go ahead and use Postman to create, update, retrieve, and delete posts. So we're going to launch our Postman. We come to get our post, we launch the query, and at the moment, like you saw in our database, we have no post. Let's go ahead and create one. So I've already pre-filled this. So we have a title of new post. Let's make that caps. Let's save that. And we go ahead and do a send. And once you do that, you come to get all post. You notice that we now have a post here. So the next thing we want to look at is getting that database to save our API to get a single post works. So we cover the post and we come to get single post. This ID is no longer valid. So if we click send, it will tell us that, oh, post with this ID not found. If we put in the correct ID, however, and we take send, we notice that we get that particular data retrieved. Now we can now go to update. If we do a send at the moment, it will tell us that, hey, this doesn't exist, right? So we need to change that before we can update it. So we get rid of that. We paste the new ID that we have, and we take send. And then you notice that we've changed our title, and now the title here now says welcome to Xcode build newly updated stuff. If we come back to get single post and we take send, we notice that the title was updated as well. Now we can go ahead and delete a post and post in the ID that we want. We can take send, and then it tells us that this has been deleted. If we try to get back that ID, it will tell us, hey, that guy doesn't exist anymore. Let's go ahead and create multiple posts. Let's create 1, let's create 2, and let's create 3. And then if you come to get all posts, you notice that we now have 3 posts, and then the count is 3. If you come to your DB and you don't enter, you have 3 posts there. Yeah, that should be it. I have been told to leave this professional, but well, thank you so very much for sticking till the end. I really appreciate your time and patience. I hope you did learn something. Also, I hope you liked the content, and if you did, please leave a like, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button to stay up to date. In the next video, we will be adding a user entity and creating ownership to the post. And then later on, we will be looking at authentication and authorization with JWT, which is JSON Web Tokens. That is going to be a fun one. If you'd like to see something specific, please leave a comment and tell me what that would be. And I will look into creating some content related to that. Until next time, stay blessed and in good health. You have to admit the last part was a little bit cringe, right? But anyways, stay blessed and in good health.